details, but it amazes me to this day, we've got an administration in D.C. that's still calling the Fort Hood case a case of workplace violence. We've got a president that is waging war on trans fats, protecting us from Oreos and microwave popcorn. I've got a deal for our commander-in-chief. My wife and I, we will protect our children from Oreos and microwave popcorn, but I would like our commander-in-chief to wage war on radical Islamic terrorism. You know, it starts with a president who actually recognizes the enemy that we face. He seems so unwilling to describe the enemy for what it is. Islam has a problem. That problem is called radical Islam. What our commander-in-chief needs to do is go to Muslim clerics and leaders and say they must do two things. First, they must condemn these individuals. Not generic acts of violence. That's not good enough. Condemn these individuals so they are not martyrs who are going to go and enjoy a reward in the afterlife. Condemn them by name and say they are going straight to hell where they belong. The second thing he must do is say to those same Muslim leaders that they must explicitly recognize the same freedoms, religious and other freedoms, they want for themselves for others who have different religious beliefs than theirs. We don't need a president who's going to talk about containing or degrading ISIS. We need a commander-in-chief who says we're going to hunt them down and kill them. That's right. Yeah. This president last week goes to the Pentagon and says we're not going to win this war with guns. This is a generational conflict. We need to change their hearts and minds. Oh, by the way, the same week we announced we're cutting 40,000 troops from the Army. We'll have the smallest military since World War II, right before World War II, actually. At a time when Russia's modernizing their nuclear arsenal, at a time we're about to allow Iran to become a nuclear power, at a time when China's investing in the Blue Water Navy, we're hauling out our military. But I am so glad that Generals Patton and Eisenhower didn't have that same attitude in World War II. Can you imagine if they had said, we're going to win this war through propaganda? The French would be speaking German right now, let's be honest.
We would too.
We've got a president who seems unwilling to name this enemy, to fight this enemy. You know, the reality is this. There is evil in this world. And it is not content to stay in Iraq or Syria. You saw the attack today. You saw the attack in Garland, Texas. And by the way, I was happy in Garland, Texas, that law enforcement official actually did have a gun. Kind of maybe suggest to you that these terrorists shouldn't try that kind of nonsense in Texas or Iowa or Louisiana. We happen to think gun control's hitting what you're aiming at. Now, there's a lot I want to talk to you about today, but I did want to get that off my chest first. The reality is there are many things I disapprove of, dislike with how this president's leading our country. And it's not just the failed or the lack of his willingness to take on radical Islamic terrorism explicitly. It's not just how he's prosecuting that war, but rather, you look at $18 trillion of debt. You look at an EPA that's trying to regulate the water in our backyards. You look at Obamacare, where they're putting bureaucrats between doctors and their patients. You're looking at all across the country, failed policy after policy. So much of this can be undone with a conservative in the White House. But the most dangerous thing he seems to be doing to me, and it's not just him, it's his apprentice-in-chief, Secretary Clinton, as well. The most dangerous thing they are doing is they're trying to redefine the idea of the American dream. When you think about it, they're trying to make it all about government dependence and redistribution and government spending and borrowing and taxing and regulating. It is socialism. Give Bernie Sanders credit, at least he's honest. I mean, they're both, President and Secretary Clinton, they're no different. At least Bernie's willing to say he's a socialist. We're on the path to turn the American dream into the European nightmare. If you want to see our future is Greece. But here's the problem. The EU, they may be able to bail out Greece. Nobody will be able to bail out America. We are the last hope for the free world. But you look at what happened in Greece, too high taxes, too many regulations, underfunded pension, slow private sector economic growth. That was our future. We've got a new normal where the economy is shrinking. We've got no growth or 2% growth, and they call that a recovery. Record low participation rate in the workforce, and they call that a recovery. Stagnant middle class wages, and they call that a recovery. I don't know about you, but that is not the American dream my parents taught me about. The reality is, Secretary Clinton, she unveiled her economic plans, and if you missed it on Monday, it was just more and more money for the government. The left has become the party of greed and arrogance. The government is so greedy, it'll never have enough of our money. It'll never have enough power to run our lives. I don't know about you, but that is not the American dream that my parents taught me. I want to share with you our story. I want to share with you the American dream my parents taught me. I want to talk about some of these issues. How do we get that back? But let me tell you their story. My dad is 1 of 9. The only one in his family that got past the 5th grade. Grew up in a house without electricity, without running water. I know, because we heard these stories every single day. You couldn't complain about anything in my family. But here's the amazing thing. Over 40 years ago, the first time my parents ever got on a plane, they came from halfway across the world to come to Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I tried to tell my kids there was no Google. They couldn't go online and search what it was like. They didn't even know anybody who had been here and could go back and tell them what Louisiana and the people and the food and everything was like. They weren't coming to a place, they were coming to an idea. They were coming to an idea of freedom and opportunity. They were coming to the American dream. Now, by the way, when they came legally when they came. I know you're not supposed to say this, but I'm going to say it anyway.
Say it.
My wife's used to that after 18 years. Look, if people want to come to our country, they should come legally.
That's right.
They should learn English.
Yes.
They should adopt our values.
Yes.
And when they get here, they should roll up their sleeves and get to work.
Yes.
And we shouldn't be giving freedoms to folks so they can use that freedom to undermine other people's freedoms.
Right.
You know, it used to be common sense to say, if you want to come here, you should want to be an American. The reality is, if you don't come.
That's right.
Nobody's making people come here. I mean, the reality is this. I'm so tired of this president trying to divide us. I don't know about you, but he's trying to divide us by race, by gender, by geography, by religion, by income, by age, by everything he can think of. I don't know about you, but I am tired of the hyphenated Americans. We're not African Americans or Indian Americans or Irish Americans or rich Americans or poor Americans. We're all Americans. And it's time for us to stand together. You know, getting back to my parents, so they got here. And the reason I'm so serious about that is you look to Europe. 2nd and 3rd generation immigrants there that don't consider themselves part of those countries or societies. That is dangerous over there. We must not let that happen over here. We used to proudly call America the great melting pot. Celebrated the fact that people could come together and join as one. And that's what my parents came for. When they got here, my mom went to school at LSU. My dad, he didn't know anybody, but he came here to work. So he was literally in married student housing, running out of money. He starts looking through the yellow pages, looking for a job. Called company after company after company, until finally, I don't know how long it took, finally a guy from a railroad company said, you can start Monday morning. And I love what my dad did next. Because it's probably one of the 10 worst things you can do during a job interview. And I tell my kids, don't do what your poppy did. You know, when you're interviewing, you never do this. He hasn't even met his boss yet. Tells his new boss, he goes, that's great, I'll start work Monday. He says, now, I don't have a car, I don't have a driver's license. So he tells his new boss, you're going to have to pick me up on the way to work Monday morning. The guy was so impressed by his enthusiasm to work, that's exactly what he did. 6 months later, I was born. I was what you would politely call a pre-existing condition. There was no Obamacare. All that means is my parents' insurance didn't cover me. But I love what my dad did next. I was born at Women's Hospital, a great hospital in Baton Rouge. My dad went to the doctor. No government forms, no contracts, no paperwork, nothing. My dad simply went to the doctor and said, I want to send you a check every month until I pay this bill in full. And he shook his hand, and that's exactly what he did. You know what I love about that? It was just... It was a simpler time back then. That's what people did.
Yep.
I asked my dad, though, how do you pay for a baby on layaway? I mean, if you skip a payment, yeah, but if you skip a payment, do they come take the baby back? You know? But like you, my parents, my dad says, no, we made all your payments. He goes, look, if you were such a bad little baby, we would have sent you back. If that had been an option, but they didn't take babies back. I'm like, oh, people just paid. That's what you did. You didn't need a contract. You didn't need a government program. You just knew that that's what you did. My parents, they came here to chase the American dream. They have caught and lived the American dream. I want my children, one day I want my grandchildren, I want your children and grandchildren to be able to live that same American dream. We are blessed. This is the greatest country in the history of the world, but I don't want my children learning about it only through the history books. Because that same country doesn't exist for them. Now look, you're going to hear a lot of candidates running for president, a lot of Republicans who are going to say great things. They'll tell you they'll shrink the budget. They'll tell you they'll protect innocent human life. They'll tell you they'll fight Common Core, and that sounds great. We got a lot of talkers. We got a talker in the White House right now. If talk was good enough, we'd be doing great. We got a first-term senator who never ran anything before we put him in the White House. He needed on-the-job training from day one. Yeah, that's right, and teleprompter as well. By the way, I hope you don't see, there are no teleprompters up here. We need a doer, not a talker. So when I tell you that I'm going to do those things, we've already done those things in Louisiana. We've cut our state budget now 26%. Over 30,000 fewer state government employees, state government bureaucrats. We're a top 10 state for private sector job creation. We've been rated the most pro-life state 6 years in a row. By the way, what an awful, offensive video. If you've seen on Tuesday, the Planned Parenthood. Now, look, I'm certain, it looks certainly, you look at the allegations, it certainly looks like they're talking about illegal human trafficking and sale of fetal body parts. But above and beyond the chances that they've actually broken the law. How disgusting. How grotesque. While she's eating her salad, drinking her wine. But I think it pulls a curtain back. And it really shows us what has happened. In the abortion industry, you know, they try to explain this. They say, well, this is talking about patients. They don't view the babies as patients. The reality is we've got to create a culture of life where every innocent human life, the unborn, the elderly, the disabled, the infirm, are all welcomed, celebrated, valued in our country, in our culture. In Louisiana, this is what I did on Tuesday. As soon as we learned of this video, not only did we order an investigation where we asked the FBI for their help with cooperating with the state of Texas, but also, secondly, today Planned Parenthood does not do any abortions in Louisiana. They want to build a clinic in New Orleans. I told them we're not giving them a permit. We're going to do this investigation. We're going to get to the bottom and figure out what they've really been doing all over this country. We've got to stand for life in Louisiana and in America. We've done other things in Louisiana. We put our own Second Amendment, protecting our Second Amendment rights in the Constitution. We have not only fought and passed laws to get rid of Common Core, we have sued Arnie Duncan in federal court, saying that he is violating the Constitution and federal law in Common Core. You heard about the fact we've got $60 billion, 90,000 jobs, more people working than ever before in Louisiana's history at a higher income, reversing 25 years of out-migration. But there is another side to all this. When you do things like this, this is what the left will say. They'll say, oh, well, under Governor Jindal, we're always cutting government. There's never enough money for government. And to that I say, guilty as charged. Absolutely. We've had 8 credit upgrades since I've been governor, and I've made it very clear. We measure prosperity not by how people are doing in the government sector, but how they're doing in the real world. Now, this is an either-or choice. Hillary Clinton, she values and measures how people are doing in the government sector. We don't. And that's what this election, that's one of the fundamental choices in this election. Look, the reality is you're going to hear a lot of talkers come and say when they get to D.C., they'll take on ISIS, they'll protect the unborn, they'll shrink the size of the federal budget. But a lot of that is talk. We need a doer, not a talker. I don't know about you, but I was so disappointed with the Supreme Court's rulings a couple of weeks ago. So they start their week by saying that we're not going to look at a dictionary. Words no longer have meanings when they rewrite the law to save Obamacare. That's what Scalia said. And then they ended their week, according to Chief Justice Roberts, they ignored the Constitution to try to change the definition of marriage. So in 1 week, they can't be bothered to read the dictionary or the Constitution. Well, I was in Iowa when that second ruling came out. The media caught up with me as soon as it came out and said, what do you think? I said, well, if we're not going to read the dictionary or the Constitution, maybe we could save some money and just get rid of the court. Like, what do we need them for? Then I decided to revive it. I said, well, at least get rid of 6 of them anyway. I mean, you can just get it down by 2/3. But, you know, I don't know about you, but no earthly court's ruling can change my view of marriage as being between a man and a woman. Hillary Clinton, President Obama, they may be evolving with the polls. My views don't change. My Christian views don't evolve or change with the polls. But now, and I support the federal efforts to restore our 10th Amendment rights, to keep marriages being between a man and a woman. But now the left is not content with our taking away our 10th Amendment rights. Now they're going after our First Amendment rights. But here's the dirty little secret. There are Republicans in D.C. that are happy that we lost. They view marriage as a distraction. They don't want to talk about this issue. They look at Obamacare and say, we don't want to invest the hard work in rolling up our sleeves and repealing and replacing Obamacare. And by the way, I'm the only candidate with a specific plan on how to do that. Only in D.C. would losing be a good thing. And that's why I say that we need somebody who's willing to say and do the things you're not supposed to do and say. If it's not clear, we're running without permission from Washington, D.C. That's okay. But going after our First Amendment rights, the left now doesn't want us to have religious freedom. They don't want us to be able to follow our conscience. You remember Hillary Clinton, remember what she said several weeks ago. She said, those of us that are pro-life need to have our religious views changed. Well, I've got news for her. My religious views are not between me and Hillary Clinton. My religious views are between me and God Almighty, and I'm not changing them just because they're unpopular with her, or the New York Times, or the Washington Post, or any of those folks in D.C. and New York. The reality is the left wants to take God out of the public square. They want to go after businesses and individuals and pastors and churches. We issued an executive order in May protecting individuals and businesses in Louisiana, saying we won't discriminate against you. The state won't come after you if you have a traditional view of marriage, being between a man and a woman. The ACLU sued me a couple of weeks ago. Now, they were for religious liberty before they were against it. They actually used the Religious Freedom Restoration Act we passed in Louisiana to protect religious minorities in our state, and I'm glad they did that. But now that Christians are the ones being discriminated against, persecuted, forced to choose between following their consciences and being able to operate their businesses, now the ACLU has shown their hypocrisy and they've gone on the other side. When Hillary Clinton and President Obama say you've got the freedom of religious expression, all they mean is in church for a couple of hours a week, you can say what you want. That's not religious liberty. Religious liberty is being able to live your life 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, according to your conscience, your sincerely held beliefs, especially when you're not hurting other people. I'll say this slowly so that even Hillary can understand it. The United States of America did not create religious liberty. Religious liberty created the United States of America. a speech back at the Reagan Library a year and a half ago saying this assault on religious liberty was coming. It's no longer coming, it is here. That's why I think, in part, it's one of the reasons I think maybe it's time for us to do something different in 2016. What do I mean by that? As Republicans, wouldn't it be nice, let's just try something. We haven't done this in a while. What if we actually embraced our own principles? What if we actually just run as conservatives and be honest with the American people about what we believe in, what we stand for, and let them choose? The reason I say that is you may have heard Jeb Bush say we've got to be willing to lose the primary in order to win the general election. Well, I disagree with that. And I want to translate that for you in a, just when the establishment says that, let me translate that into plain English. If you don't live in D.C., let me just translate. What they're really saying is hide your beliefs. Try to get the left and the media to like you. That never works. And if we try to do that again, we will lose, and we will deserve to lose this election. Look, every politician will come tell you the next election is the most important one. This one really is. This one's about the future of our country. If you're looking for somebody to manage our descent into mediocrity, I'm not your candidate. But if you're looking for somebody to take on the establishment, whether it's in our party or theirs, to make big changes and get us on the right path, then I'm asking you to join us. As your commander-in-chief, we'll get 4 things done. First, we're going to repeal and replace all of Obamacare, not just a little bit. Secondly, we're going to stop talking about it. There'll be no comprehensive bill, no amnesty, but we are going to secure our border and get rid of these temporary measures. Third, we're going to shrink the size of our federal government, and we're going to grow our private sector economy so our kids can join the middle class. And fourth and finally, we're going to invest in our defense. Our friends trust us, our enemies fear us. We're going to stand with Israel. We're going to stop Iran from becoming a nuclear power. I'm asking people to join a cause more than joining a campaign. I'm asking people to believe again. When I was young, my dad told me that Americans could do anything. I believed him then, and I believe him now. And I think you believe that too. I think you've been frustrated these last 7 years. I think you want to believe again in America. Churchill said this about America. He said, you can count on the American people to do the right thing after they've exhausted every alternative. Folks, we've run out, after 7 years of President Obama, we've run out of alternatives. It is time for us to start doing the right thing again. President Reagan reminded us this. He described us as a shining city on a hill. But he also reminded us that every generation must choose for itself to renew those principles of freedom. He said it was not inevitable. Previous generations have spilt great blood and treasure to give us the freedoms we enjoy today. This is our turn to choose. This is our turn to decide what we are going to leave behind for our children and grandchildren. We mustn't become the first generation that mortgages our children's future. It leaves fewer opportunities than those we inherited from our parents. I truly believe America's best days are ahead of us. I truly believe we can dominate this century. I never want our military in a fair fight. I want them to dominate any potential conflict.
Yes.
But it is time for us to take our country back. I'm asking you to join our cause, believe again, go to bobbyjindal.com, learn more about what we can do. It is not optional for us to win in 2016. And it's not for you or me, it's not for the Republican Party, it's not for Iowa or Louisiana. It is for the United States of America. God bless y'all. Thank y'all. Thank y'all very much. And I want to hear from you, and I'll take questions on anything or everything. It doesn't have to be anything I've talked about. Any issue y'all want to talk about. Yes, sir.
Are you gonna reinstate GlassSteagall?
I'm sorry, reinstate.
GlassSteagall?
Oh, you're talking about make sure I've got this right. The question is about the divisions on the investment banking side and the insured deposits. Is that? So the question has to do with, I do think one of the things we've got to do, you remember the whole too big to fail debacle. And you remember all the bailouts. And you remember Barney Frank's, the Frank Dodd regulations that actually made things worse. I think one of the things we've got to do is we roll back some of the Frank Dodd and other regulations is truly revisit this idea of what banks are able to do with federally insured deposits. Because what happens is, I don't want the taxpayers to be on the hook for private risk taking. And that happens when you've got federally insured deposits they're allowed to use in different ways, and also is allowed when you have the so-called too big to fail. And I actually think they made it worse. They didn't fix it. So I'm absolutely open to looking at ways to make sure that federal taxpayer dollars aren't put at risk. I think that it's, I don't mind if somebody wants to go risk their own money. That's their business. And it's a free country and they're willing to do it. I don't want them risking my money. And so I am absolutely open to looking at ways to protect the taxpayers' dollars. I think that's a better approach than this idea of the federal government's going to bail them out. I think it's a better approach than the federal government trying to micro-regulate and micromanage the private sector. Yes, sir.
Yes. This Iran deal that Obama thinks is great, and Kerry and Clinton. There's also this Bob Corker from Tennessee has got this law passed, Nuclear Agreement Review Act, that makes Congress have to vote down instead of vote for. What's your opinion? Doesn't that make the executive the lawmaker?
Absolutely. Yeah, I disagreed with the Corker bill when it was passed. One senator voted against it, Senator Tom Cotton. I praised him at the time for it. Not only is it backwards, but look at what normally when the president does a treaty, it takes a 2/3 vote for ratification.
Yes.
Yes.
Now, the Congress has to vote to reject it, and then the president can veto it,
And still pass it.
and all he needs is 1/3 plus 1 for this then to then be effective. To me, so that's why I thought it was bad. When they did it, I said, wait a minute, you're turning this around and making it backwards, especially at a time when Menendez and others, there was bipartisan support for tougher sanctions. I think a couple of things. One, I think Democrats now have an opportunity and an obligation to say we're Americans first, not Democrats first. And we're going to do what's right for our country. I know that the president's putting all kinds of pressure on Democrats on the Hill saying, you got to stick with me, vote with me. They're going to be there long after he's gone. And this shouldn't be about polls or partisan politics. If all you knew about this deal was that Israel hates it and Syria loves it. But if you actually look at the details, the president told us, all right, we're going to make sure they don't have centrifuges and enrichment capacity. Oh, but now they get to keep over 5,000 centrifuges. Yeah. He said, I'm going to get anytime, anywhere inspections, but now he's not. He told us all kinds of things. They're going to export all their enriched uranium. Here's the reality. Why wouldn't you at least say, you've got to get rid of all your enrichment capacity, rid of all your enriched uranium, cut off the pathway to the plutonium bomb. You have to recognize Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state. You have to release your American prisoners, anytime, anywhere inspections, cut off all ties to terrorism, including Hamas and Hezbollah, and then and only then will we begin to gradually lift the sanctions instead of lifting the sanctions first. Otherwise, it's like telling your kids, we're going to let you eat dessert first, and we trust you'll eat your lima beans later. Well, good luck with that. I mean, I don't know about your kids. I know what my kids would do. I mean, maybe your kids are better behaved than mine. The reality is this, and look, that's a trivia. We're talking about huge matters here. I'm not trying to trivialize this, because it is an awful, awful deal. Of all of his foreign policy legacies, this example of leading from behind, he could start a nuclear arms race in the Middle East.
Absolutely.
You could have the Saudis, the Egyptians, the Turks wanting to buy their own weapons from now Pakistan. And talk about being closer to Armageddon. You've got not only Europe and Israel, but America now. So one, I think Congress absolutely has to reject this. But secondly, I've already said this. I signed the Cotton letter that was sent before the deal was signed. And I've said this. As the next commander-in-chief, I'm not going to honor a bad deal that he has made, because the Constitution tells the federal government their first obligation is to protect America. That's right. Protect us. Right. So you're right. It's ridiculous they flipped it on its head. It should take a 2/3 vote to approve it, not a 2/3 vote to reject it. Right. Exactly. Yes, sir.
What do you think of Kate's law?
I'm a supporter. So the question was, what do I think of Kate's law? This is by the way, I'm still waiting for the president, and maybe he said something that I haven't seen him say anything about the sanctuary city debacle, San Francisco, the death of this. I mean, it's hard to, again, there's so many things that just outrageous and shock us. It almost seems like every day. You got a young woman shot with her father, killed in front of her father while she's out as a tourist by a felon who should never have been released in the first place. So case law, there's a movement, and I've indicated I would support this, that would say that these folks that have been here, they've been caught, they've been sent back, if they come back, they would be in prison. I think it's 5 years. It'd be a felony if they come back again. Look, I mean, here's the thing that's ridiculous with these sanctuary cities. Not only are they breaking federal law, but they're getting federal grants to do something they're not doing. They're getting federal dollars to go out there and retain and hold these folks that are here legally, and they're not doing it. They're still getting the money. Well, look, you've got a president who picks and chooses what laws he enforces. You've got a Supreme Court that selects which laws and how they want to interpret the law. This commander-in-chief, he's not the first president that disagrees with the laws, but he may be the first one that just routinely picks which ones he wants to follow. You don't get to do that as president. There's an oath where you have to uphold the Constitution and the laws of this country. That the reality is, if you don't like the law, change the law. Go convince Congress. That's the way the system works.
Well, on that issue, we just went through an election cycle. We won, so to speak, and we've got a bunch of people that you're going to have to deal with that are sitting there doing the same dang thing that the Democrats have done for the past 6 years.
You're right.
How can you do something about that? Because if you can't make Republicans vote conservative and follow the laws, everything you say, I like what you're saying. Don't misunderstand me.
Sure.
But what good does it do if somebody doesn't have the courage in the Republican Party to stand up and say to Boehner or any number of Republicans?
Right.
I mean, if you don't have the courage to stand up and make them, or at least try and get them to see what you're doing, we're no better off today than we were last election, if you ask me, because they haven't done a dang thing right.
No, you're right. You're exactly right. Look, this last election was not about getting McConnell a bigger office. That seems to be the only thing we've accomplished. The reality is, if you remember, when they were running for office, they told us, give us the majority, we'll get rid of amnesty. We'll get rid of Obamacare. And we're going to balance the budget, we're going to shrink the size of the federal budget. They didn't do any of that. You're exactly right. And that's why I say just sending a Republican to the White House isn't enough. We've got to send a conservative who will make real changes. I'll tell you a couple of things. I was in Congress a couple of times. I always like to say I was sentenced to 2 terms. That's what it felt like. I mean, I was rather do that away. We've got to change. It does, I mean, you're right. Whether it's Republicans in the majority or Democrats, we've got to change the culture in D.C. We've got a permanent governing class that just stays there forever, and then they become highly paid lobbyists. That is not what the Founding Fathers intended. We need citizen leaders who leave their businesses, their factories, their families, go work part-time for us, and then live under the same rules and laws they pass for the rest of us. Remember how great they thought Obamacare was? Until all of a sudden people said, well, why aren't you under Obamacare? If it's so good, why don't you pursue Obamacare? And then all of a sudden they weren't such big fans of it. We need term limits. And we need not only term limits, we need a part-time Congress who cannot become lobbyists. We have that in Louisiana, and we also need, I believe, and I say this, we pay our legislators a per diem in Baton Rouge, in Louisiana, for every day they go to work, not an annual salary. I think we need to pay Congress on a per diem basis. But only pay them for every day they stay out of D.C. Don't pay them to go there. Don't incentivize bad behavior. I think we need a balanced budget amendment in the Constitution. We need a supermajority before they can raise your taxes, a supermajority before they can grow government faster than the private sector economy. I want to tell you a couple of quick stories. So when I got to Congress, they give you this pin. And so you're allowed to go in the secret hallways in the Capitol, nobody else is allowed. It's a pretty neat deal. Then they give you a license plate. And it's got, if you're in the House, it has H and a number. Number 1 is the most senior, most important person there. There are 435 members, right? So mine was always in the 400s. I was never, but it kind of tells you quickly who's important and where you rank based on how many years you've been there. And then they give you a voting card that only you can use. You can't give it to staff or family. Only you're allowed to go on. It's about the size of a credit card. Well, I learned the importance of all these things. The pin, first of all, means they don't have to stand in line at the metal detectors. If you ever notice, they're allowed to walk right around because they're wearing those pins. That's how Capitol Police knows. Oh, they've got a pin, they can go over. And they change the pin every 2 years. So you can't get an old pin. As long as you got a new pin, they allow you to walk around those metal detectors. But we have to wait in the second one. One day, I was a new member. I didn't really know that area that well. And I was trying to park my car. My office was in Longworth, and I was looking for parking at Raeburn for some reason. And I kept circling around. And all the parking, if you've ever been in D.C., a lot of the parking spots are painted, no parking, reserve, whatever. You can't park there. And they're all empty, but they're all parked. This was early in the morning. So I'm circling around looking like an idiot. And finally, this Capitol policeman walks outside and says, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm looking for a place to park." And I said, "This all says no parking." And he kind of looks at me like I'm an idiot. He goes, "Well, that's not for you." He says, "Without a license plate, you can park wherever you want." Now, I imagine, I've never tried this, I imagine if you try to park your car on the Capitol lawn, they wouldn't tow it. They would just leave it. They go, "All right, it's got one of those license plates." But it's the card that's got the real power. Because everybody wants you to vote their way. So when the lobbyists come, I always tell people, it's amazing when you get elected. Your jokes get funnier. You get smarter. You get better looking. It's amazing. Well, I remember when I won my election, I had a guy that endorsed one of my opponents. And he had been on TV just going against me and against me and against me. When I won, he came to see me. He said, "Bobby, I was secretly for you." And I said, "I don't even know what that means." I said, "Next time I want you to be secretly for the other guy, publicly work for me, the way you did the other guy." But so I would always tell my colleagues, next time a bunch of lobbyists come in, I want you to make up the dumbest story you can make up. I mean, whatever you can think of. Tell them the sun rose in the west, whatever you can think of. And I said, I bet you they'll try to agree with you. I bet you that lobbyists will say, "Congressman, that's the smartest thing I've ever heard." I mean, I noticed the sun was looking kind of funny today. I was wondering what was going on. Because it's like nobody wants to tell the emperor he's got no clothes on. We've got a bunch of math deniers in both parties. They both know we're going broke. They both know Social Security and Medicare are going to go broke if we don't do something. They both know we're not paying down our debt. They both know we'll be the next Greece, the next Puerto Rico. The last thing I'll say, look, so President Obama, this is a backhanded compliment. He had the Congress and the White House for 2 years. He got Obamacare done. He got $1 trillion stimulus done. Imagine what more he would have done if he'd had it longer. We had the White House. We had the House for 6 years, the Senate for most of it. What were the conservative reforms we got done? Now, I'll give them credit. They did keep us safe after 9/11, and they deserve credit. They don't get enough credit for that. But we got No Child Left Behind. How's that a conservative bill? Why is it? That's what we spend our political capital on. They spend their political capital driving their agenda. You're right. When Republicans are there, government grows. It just grows a little less quickly. When Democrats are there, it grows more quickly. This next election cannot just be we're going to slow the growth rate of government. We got to shrink the size of government. We got to get government out of our lives. There are so many things government shouldn't be doing. And I'll just, as one example, I'll throw out, well, I don't know which one to throw out because I'm so mad at both of them. I don't know if I should throw out the EPA or the Federal Department of Education, but both of them. We need to take power away from the bureaucrats. So you're right, just saying another Republican's not enough. We've got to send somebody who's going to go take on the establishment on both sides. Yes, sir.
As president, how do you feel you can influence term limits?
Well, people forget that back in the 90s, we came within one vote of getting the balanced budget amendment, at least the 2/3 vote cap into the House. There were one vote in the Senate. Reagan proved he got a Democratic Congress to cut tax rates, to invest in the military, and he won the Cold War without firing a shot because he went around them. He went directly to the people. The one thing I do remember from my time in Congress is the one thing that motivates them is they're very interested in self-preservation. So if you put it in front of them and say, look, this is not a complicated term or concept. This isn't one of those where you can come home to your voters and say, well, I'm for it, but, because a lot of times they do that. I know the rules. I know the games they play. They'll vote for a bill that's got 1,000 different things in it and say, look, I'm for motherhood and apple pie. That's why I voted for the bill. Now, I don't know why it had all that nonsense in the back of it. I didn't know about that. Remember, Pelosi, you got to pass Obamacare to know what's in it? Our limits we can all understand. And what I would do is I would go to the people and challenge those senators and representatives. You don't have to vote for it. Just go home and explain to people why you're against it. Explain to people why you're so personally indispensable then nobody else can do this job. Explain to people why you're smarter than they are in running their lives, and we need a permanent governing class because we're not smart enough. You know, in the entire country, we can't find another 535 people that would be qualified to come and help us make our laws. I think that out of self-preservation, they will vote for it. In Louisiana, that's how term limits got. They got done before I was governor. Legislators weren't real happy about it, but a legislator wouldn't go away, kept proposing it, and voters understood it. Same thing with the balanced budget amendment or a supermajority vote to raise taxes. People, look, nobody in D.C. is going to happily give away their power. The Republicans and the Democrats both like the current system. We're going to have to go take it away. But the one thing they are interested in is self-preservation. If they understand they got to vote for this or they're going to be voted out, they'll vote for it. So I think the best way to do it, my first term, we had a Democratic majority in the House and the Senate. We got school choice done in New Orleans, the largest income tax cut in our state's history, and we haven't raised taxes in my state since I've been governor. And you wonder how that happened, because the president of the Senate was a pretty liberal guy. Well, I told him what I would do and I wouldn't do, and I said, look, Joel, if you send me those other things, I'm just going to veto for me in several years. And what I found is once they test your limits, once you stand on principle, then they will test you. They will see if they can run you over, and if you prove to them that you can't be run over, they tested Reagan. They went to Reagan and said, oh, that was great campaign rhetoric, but you didn't really mean that, right? I mean, that was just, you got elected, now we're going to go and do what we've always done. And when he showed that he meant it, they backed off. They said, all right, we got to work with this president. I think the same thing is true with Congress, in both parties. They'll test you. They'll come at you and say, oh, that was great. Yeah, we all talk about term limits and stuff. You just don't, you can't really mean it. And that's why I think, like the previous question, we're so frustrated after last year's election. I meant it. When they told me they were going to repeal Obamacare, I thought they really meant it. They were going to go and at least try to do it. At least fight for it. Fight as hard for it as they fight for themselves. I don't know about you, I don't remember the TV ads, the fine print saying, we'll only do the easy parts of Obamacare.
Yeah.
They said, give us the majority, we'll take care of all of it. I mean, so anyway, I think that with the people behind you and the president wanting to stand on principle, you'd be amazed what we can get in D.C. Yes, ma'am.
My name's Dewan. I'm from Baltimore. I moved to Iowa about 10, 11 years ago. And with No Child Left Behind, I worked with those kids in the inner city. North Avenue, I spent summers with them. And they were just children, but their school is so horrible. And I had friends that taught in Baltimore City schools. And my girlfriend, she had first graders. She had 25 first graders. She was told that she was allowed to pass on 2 of the worst crack babies to special education. And the rest of them went right on through the system. And they're not getting an education. In Baltimore City and home ec, they hold up an empty cake box and the teacher reads the directions on it. Because there's so much welfare, there's no taxes in the cities, and the county, they don't want their money to go into the city to help these kids. I took a few kids in from Baltimore City, and I thought I was getting a boy that was a junior going into the senior. He was barely a sophomore. He only went to school 36 days a year before, and he managed to get a D in a class. So we can't bring back trade schools and give people the respect and up our economy and cut the government, living on the government all the time, and give them their self-respect back, then things just can't change. And we really have to start with the kids. And around here, our schools are even Steven. But we really need to work on that welfare and give people pride back and teach the trades. In Baltimore, they took all that out. They took out the shop. They took out bricklaying. They took out electricity. They took out plumbing. So there's nothing for them to learn to get a job. They're coming out of school, if they're lucky, if they do graduate and they're not attacked by a gang member. So I'm very big on the No Child Left Behind, and could we please pay attention to the inner cities and understand and lift up their education to lift them up.
Well, a couple of things. First of all, thank you for teaching, and thank you for caring so much about those kids. I think every child in America should have the chance to get a great education. I don't think the quality of a child's education should depend on their zip code. And the reason I don't like No Child Left Behind is I don't think it takes federal bureaucracy and rules and paperwork to accomplish that. I'll give you a couple of examples in what we did in Louisiana. New Orleans' public schools, I would argue, were probably just as bad as Baltimore's at one point. And before the storm, there were all kinds of scandals. The FBI was investigating them, and they had all kinds of scandals. A lot of changes were made after the storm, and we built on those changes. We allowed the dollars to follow the child instead of the child following the dollars. What does that mean? That means we trust moms and dads to know how their children should learn best. Some kids will do well in homeschooling or public schools or private schools or parochial schools or online programs or dual enrollment programs. I'm a big believer in trade schools. So when I first got to Louisiana, when I first got to be governor, not the first guy I was born in, my first year as governor, we were 70-30 in terms of the percentage of our kids going to four-year versus trade school. Now we're closer to like 55-45. And we did it not by shrinking our four-year schools, but by growing our community, our technical colleges. We have thousands of good-paying jobs that require technical training. And so you're right. I think there was too long a cultural stigma on that kind of training and those jobs. And that's a mistake. Because a lot of those kids with that training can go out there and get great-paying jobs with benefits. We need to give kids we give kids the dollars so they can, for example, take a course. They can start in public school and take privately provided courses. So if a local company wants to teach welding, they can go take that course during the day. We'll pay for it. That way, when they graduate, they're already certified and ready to work. And they don't have to retrain them because they've trained them already. They don't have to say, well, the way the school trained them wasn't the way we would have trained them. I'll tell you real quick a story about a mom in New Orleans, because you're exactly right. It's heartbreaking to see what some of these kids go through. So in New Orleans East, we allow the dollars to follow the child. In New Orleans as a city, nearly 100% of the kids are in charter schools. Now, I'm not saying every child should be in a charter school. That's just, in New Orleans, that's what they chose to do. They double the percentage in reading and math on grade level in 5 years. New Orleans East is an area north of the 9th Ward. It's a mixed neighborhood, and it was hit hard by Katrina. And then there was a parochial school there that got flooded by Katrina. They rebuilt it. Part of it got burnt down. They rebuilt it a second time. So we've done a statewide scholarship program where the dollars follow the child, so the parents can choose to send their kids to wherever, the parents can send their kids to whatever school, and the dollars follow them. So there are a lot of poor families whose kids now go to this parochial school. I was there to see some of those kids, and a mom came to see me when I was there. And she told me her story. She said her mother had gotten pregnant as a teenager. She was a single mom and gone on welfare and had her. She herself got pregnant as a teenager, was a single mom, had gone on welfare. She was there with her daughter. So third generation in this family. And she almost had tears in her eyes as she told me her story. She said she was working 3 jobs to keep her girl in this parochial school. And said thanks to the scholarship program, she could stay there. And she was coming to thank me. She said, Governor, this is the first time my daughter has ever brought home homework, ever, from school. First time she's worn a uniform. First time she has felt safe. First time there's been toilet paper in the bathroom, pen and paper in the classroom. First time she's thinking about staying in school after high school even. When you think about it, that's the American dream. That's a mom saying, I want my daughter to do better than I did. I want to break the cycles of poverty and dependence. I mean, that's not how she said it, but that's what she was saying. I want my daughter to do better than I've done. I don't want her to make the same mistakes that I made. That's what we all want for our, it doesn't matter who you are, we all want that for our kids. And what I love about this mom, she comes from a district that votes 99.9% Democratic. So I'm pretty sure she didn't vote for me. If she did, it was by mistake. She hit the wrong button. And the reason I say that is educational reform shouldn't be a partisan issue. But I think fundamental in making it work is trusting locals. The difference between me and Arnie Duncan and me and the No Child Left Behind laws, I don't think Washington knows best. I don't think sitting in D.C. they should be making curriculum decisions or designing Common Core or telling you your child needs to eat this food for lunch.
Going back a couple of questions about term limits and those things. We all know that Congress will not pass a constitutional amendment for term limits or a balanced budget. What are your opinion or ideas on the state's constitutional conventions?
Well, I was supportive. There was an effort in Louisiana to pass a resolution. I know there are a number of states that are looking at that. I think it's preferable for us to try to clean up the mess that's D.C. If they won't do it, I've been supportive of the states coming together and forcing them to do things like the balanced budget amendment, the term limits, and the other initiatives. But I don't want to let them off the hook. I mean, I think that that's fine, and I'm supportive of the states doing it, but I also don't think we should let these folks that represent us go to D.C. Look, the great news is we get to hire and fire them. And I think they've forgotten that. I think we need to remind them of that. I think they think we work for them instead of them working for us. And I think it's time we took that power back. 7 out of the 10 boom counties in recent years are in the D.C. area. That's not real. Folks, that's not sustainable. That's not a real economy. The government doesn't make anything. It's consuming wealth. But yeah, I'm supportive of that to get it done. Yes, sir.
you mentioned that Medicare and Social Security are going to go broke. How come I never hear that welfare and these other giveaway programs are going up? I pay into Medicare.
No, you're right. Well, look, our whole government's going broke. I mean, the reality is, the only reason we're not there yet is they're able to print money, but they can't keep printing money. I mean, the whole thing is insolvent. I mean, look, the reality is that the president loves to tell you, oh, they said this year's debt, good news, folks, this year's debt's only going to be just under $500 billion. Well, wait a minute. That's on top of $18 trillion of accumulated debt. That's with artificially low interest rates that are not sustainable. That's not counting our unfunded accrued liabilities. So you're exactly right. The whole enterprise is going broke. I mean, the reality is, if they were honest with this, the head of the CBO went to Congress and said, look, the borrowing costs could go up overnight. I mean, relatively overnight, meaning that you may not necessarily have a warning when America's borrowing costs, when our creditors say we're not going to buy this debt at the levels they've been buying it. Think about this, when the Chinese engage in that cyber attack, so we got a president that's going to go over there and say, hey, you guys need to stop doing that. Oh, by the way, can we borrow some more money? Because we don't have enough over here. How in the world do we protect our intellectual property rights? How in the world do we tell them to stay out of the South China Sea and stop building these military facilities? And we're going to borrow money for them to pay our bills. So you're exactly, the whole government's going broke. And the problem with Social Security is they're taking the money that's supposed to be in Social Security and using it to mask the rest of the debt. You know, they tell you, oh, that money is still there. It's really, it's on a piece of paper. They wrote it down, but that's what they use to mask the rest of the debt up there. And so you're right. You paid into Social Security. You paid into Medicare. The whole place, the reality is the whole place is going broke. You couldn't run your business or your family like that. If you tried that, if you tried those accounting tricks, good luck. But then again, look, the IRS, they're allowed to lose their emails. Nobody ever goes to jail. Nobody will lose their jobs. Nobody ever loses their pension. Next April 15th, I don't want you to do this. You look like good people. I don't recommend you do this. But can you imagine next April 15th if you told the IRS, I had those receipts, but the computer ate up my emails. It wouldn't let you get that out of your mouth. And yet, just once, whether it was Fast and Furious, whether it was the IRS scandal, whatever the scandal, just once, wouldn't it be nice if somebody lost their jobs, lost their pensions, went to jail? And if that happened, it would never happen.
We have time for one more. One more.
Yes, sir.
Yes, Mr. Jindal, thank you for your time tonight. Would you speak specifically about flat tax and tax fairness? Thank you.
Well, look, I know there are a lot of different views about how do we reform the tax code. We've done detailed plans on things like health care, on education, on energy, on defense. We've not yet put out our detailed tax reform plans. I will say in general, where I'd like to see our tax code go. I'd like to see it lower and flatter with fewer carve-outs. Both sides are going to have to give up their carve-outs. The reason I say that is it accomplishes two things. One, it promotes private sector economic growth. And secondly, it takes power away from the IRS. So the reality is we all think, oh, well, we'll get rid of Lois Lerner and all these folks. But there will always be bureaucrats there. And as long as they've got the discretion to tell you and to run your lives, you're going to see those abuses because the bureaucrats tend to think they're going to be there longer than the elected officials. Their attitude is, oh, we're going to be there long after they're gone. I think the last time we had successful tax reform in this country, I remember, was in the late 80s under President Reagan. It was bipartisan, where they lowered the rates, they made it lower, they made it flatter, and both sides had to give up. Now, remember, it's both sides. We rightfully criticize them for handouts and bailouts like Solyndra and other nonsense. But the Republican Party, we know we shouldn't be the party of big government. We can't be the party of big business either.
Right.
And there's sometimes the temptation for the Republican Party to say, oh, we're going to protect the carve-outs for our friends. But you can't do that if you're saying we're going to get rid of the carve-outs for their friends. Everybody needs to be coming to the table. So we'll be putting out a detailed tax plan shortly. Let me thank you. Jill has said that we got to stop there with questions, but I did say up front, Supriya and I will be sticking around, and so I know there were folks who didn't get to ask your questions. Please come up. We'd be more than happy to continue to visit as long as folks want to do that. Let me close with a couple of observations. One, thank you for coming. I know it's warm in here. I know y'all have been patient, so thank y'all for, and I know there are other places y'all could be on a Thursday night, so thank y'all for being here. Let me close with this observation. I'm a complete optimist about the future of America. We've talked a lot today about the problems and challenges we face, and they are real and they are serious. But there's no other country I would rather be.
Nope.
I wouldn't trade places with anybody. I still give thanks to God Almighty every day we are blessed to be in the greatest country in the world. It isn't inevitable. That's what this election is really. This election is not about you and me. It's about our children, our grandchildren. It's about those who come after us. And so we're asking you to join our cause. We're asking you to believe again. Let's go get